The 20th century is at an end, and with it the second millennium. What are we, the people of Horwich, to make of the 2,000 years of history, and where will the next millennium take us? One thing is certain. Change has taken place at an increasingly rapid rate, and no more so than in the last century. Many of our older folk can still remember when the living room was not dominated by the television or radio, and families gathered around the piano or harmonium for a sing-song. There was no electric lighting, no central heating, no split-level cookers or microwave ovens, no electric kettles, washing machines, spin dryers, steam irons, and certainly no flush toilets actually inside the house. Just over 100 years ago, the town of Horwich hardly existed, but the coming of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Works in 1885 changed all that. By the early 1900s, it had created a mini new town to cater for the burgeoning population which had quadrupled from 3,000 to 12,000 in 10 years. And it laid the foundations for the Horwich that we know today. As the businesses linked to the works and the growth of the town prospered, the industry that had originally put Horwich on the map, bleaching, went into decline, and by the 1930s had ceased altogether. By the 1980s, the railway works and many other traditional industries in Horwich, like textiles, paper, brick and tile making, and mining, had also disappeared, as changing markets, business practices and patterns of life forced rationalisation and change. From a small, self-sufficient, independent community, Horwich has now become a commuter town and part of a much bigger and more dynamic world. Fortunately, it still retains much of its character and links with the past. As we stand here on the upper section of Chorley Old Road on the boundary of Horwich at the start of a new century, it's worth casting our eyes over the magnificent view of the Manchester conurbation before us, stretching from the Penine hills in the distance to the western outskirts of Bolton, before sweeping across the Middlebrook Valley. To the new retail centre with the Reebok Stadium, the home of Bolton Wanderers as its centrepiece. Then onwards towards the Lancashire coast, with the Welsh hills in the background, almost 100 miles away. This view, like much around us, has transformed dramatically in the last 200 years, with much industrial development taking place. However, thankfully, a short journey down this road, and a little over to our right, the West Penine moors featuring Rivington, Anglesark and Winter Hill make the edge of this built-up area of this part of Lancashire the beginning of a wild but welcome green lung stretching northwards to Blackburn some 15 miles away. Our journey through early 21st century Horwich begins on its eastern boundary as Chorley Old Road sweeps down from Bolton. To drive down this road is to experience one of the great panoramic views of the north of England, stretching to the Lancashire coast and across to Rivington Pike, a view that has remained fundamentally the same for thousands of years, but the detail of which has changed quite a lot if you look around. The road itself used to pass by what is now Ridgemont House, originally the White House, the residence of the influential Pilkington family, and then down into Fleet Street. The road was realigned in 1763 as part of the improvements to the Bolton and Nightingale Turnpike. Shortly afterwards, in 1777, Thomas Ridgway established the Walsach's Bleach Works, which still can be seen on the right-hand side of the road. This was the first major industry to come to Horwich and completely changed the face of a sleepy village through the development of a business that prospered for 150 years. The whole of the top side of Horwich, as it is known, developed as a result of the bleach works, with the building of stone cottages on Nelson Street, Duncan Street, George Street, Wood Street and Chapel Street. These were known as the club houses and were built for the workforce in the late 17 and early 1800s. The building of the parish church school in 1793 and the rebuilding of the parish church in 1831 all came about through the benevolence of Joseph Ridgway, acknowledged as the founding father of present-day Horwich, who presided over affairs from his house at Ridgemont. Just down the road from the church stands the Black Bull, which was a centre of local administration in early Victorian times. Horwich has had a colourful history. There is plenty of evidence of early man living on the moors above Horwich around 1500 BC, with an axe head found in Tiger's Clough dated 1000 years earlier. The Romans had a settlement at Blackrock and regularly marched through Horwich on their way to Blackburn 2000 years ago, along the valley route where the reservoirs are now. The whole area around Horwich was a royal hunting forest from the 11th to 15th centuries, complete with legends of outlaws, executions and retribution. And a grammar school was founded in nearby Rivington by Bishop Pilkington in 1566, together with a number of prosperous farms on the surrounding hillsides in Tudor and Elizabethan times. Yet despite all this rich history, Horwich at the end of the 18th century was a poor and drab place. We now return to Walsach's to hear from Jeff Wayne about the Ridgways and the way they helped to transform Horwich.
Thomas Hampson, in his History of Horwich, published in 1883, describes the village as follows. The roads were wretched and uncared for. Property was a commodity of little value. Only the few houses which even today, in 1883, bear their ancient names, relieved the bleak and cheerless surroundings. No distinguishing mark to break the monotony. The moorland, with its heather-covered background and rocky cliffs, gave a barren aspect to the landscape. Lee Lane was a narrow, undignified thoroughfare, with 3 or 4 houses a considerable distance from one another. Generations of Horwichers worked for the Ridgways at these bleach works. It was the backbone of their lives, as we shall hear from Lucy Pendlebury.
My great-grandfather, my grandfather and my father all worked at Walsach's.
Right, good. So what sort of employers would you say they were?
Oh, they were all bad at Walsach's. They were very, very good. Well, I found them all right. You didn't have much trouble with he never heard any. I never know anybody being sacked, as they called it. I mean, they were all local, and of course he became out to work. It's like it is today. There was there was no other jobs. There was the railways, but they were particularly they took on.
Yeah.
But all such as they were very, very fussy. And they weren't all right. Well, the foreman was told, you must go and tell them they've got to finish if they were pregnant or anything like that. Oh dear me, no. Very, very Victorian.
Against this background, we owe a considerable debt of gratitude to the 3 generations of Ridgways who, through their business enterprise and paternalism, helped to transform Horwich in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. When Thomas Ridgway decided to move his bleaching operation from Bolton to Horwich in the late 1770s, it was little more than a small, isolated village of a few hundred people. Less than 50 years later, it was a well-established, well-run, self-contained community which laid the foundations of present-day Horwich, which we can still admire and enjoy the benefits of today. Little wonder the Ridgways were known as the uncrowned kings of Horwich.
The former post office stands opposite the Blackrock church, in the midst of the bleachers' cottages. As a result of the rapid expansion of the Walsuches bleach works, the population increased tenfold from 300 to 3,000 between 1774 and 1840. Evidence of the early 19th century development of Horwich can be found in the various stone properties running along Lee Lane right through the centre of the town. The farms on the Rivington hillside overlooking the town are much older. The brick-built properties arrived with the second industrial age, promoted by the arrival of the railway works in the 1880s, and Horwich Station was built in 1868, which was situated right in the heart of town, where the station park is now. The station closed in 1965. The public entrance still survives, as does the station master's house and the goods entrance. This fine example of an early mill workers' complex is easy to miss behind the filling station, and is much older than the station, being built in the early 18th century. Also built around the same time is this stone terrace, which is hidden away behind the Bridge Hotel, itself a monument to the railway age. An inspired piece of forward thinking by Horwich Urban District Council just before it was dissolved in 1974 resulted in the construction of Horwich Leisure Centre on a former small holding at Grundy Hill, together with its swimming pool. Grundy Hill is of course more famous as the former home of Horwich RMI Football Club before the land was sold for housing. The team went on to become Lee RMI and now play at Hilton Park Lee in the Conference League. The Horwich and District Agricultural Show was also held at Grundy Hill in the early 1950s. In the heyday of the loco works, the whole area was a focal point for recreation, and is still today the home of Horwich RMI Cricket Club. the Sports and Social Club, an all-weather football pitch and park. Lee Lane and Winter Hay Lane bear testimony to the explosion of building that took place at the turn of the last century when the loco works arrived. Shops, offices, banks, public buildings, pubs, cinemas, churches and houses were all constructed in this area to cater for the influx of newcomers. Many things might look familiar to us in old photographs, but life was very different 100 years ago. For example, there were small shops of every description catering for all sorts of needs not now seen on the high street. The many food shops were full of locally grown produce prominently displayed, and in the case of the numerous butchers' shops, stocked with meat actually slaughtered on the premises. Industrial work was hard and dirty with long hours and little leisure time. However, Horwichers were particularly fortunate to have the Rivington moorland on their doorstep and to have highly organised sports activities courtesy of RMI, other major employers and the Sunday leagues. The number of pubs in the town shows that people used to work hard and play hard. The trains to Blackpool or Bolton were occasional means of visiting other places, but leisure was essentially local or homespun, with 3 cinemas where you could see a different film every night of the week, church halls, the Mechanics Institute, RMI clubs and societies. Particularly fondly remembered was the Princess Theatre on Lee Lane, opened in 1896, and known locally as Johnny's after its colourful manager Johnny Holland, who ran it in the 1920s. It also contained a billiard hall and shops, the best known of which was Frank Hart's cycle shop. A supermarket now stands on the site. Most prominent of all the shops in Horwich during the last century was the Co-op. In its heyday it had branches all over the town. The main shop, though not now operational, is clearly identified by its elephant crest and 1902 date stone. Opposite the Co-op is the public hall, built by a local mill owner, Peter Martin, in 1878. It is a key building, originally used as a library, reading room and social centre. It is now the home of Horwich Town Council and Bolton Borough Council's area offices. Despite many changes of use, the retention of many old buildings on Lee Lane or Winter Hay Lane means that the centre of Horwich still retains much of its village feel. A few of the original shops still remain, like Dyson's and Hooton's, the chemists, plus the successors to the original greengrocers, the butchers and bakers. But the most remarkable feature of Horwich Town Centre at the end of the 20th century is the number of cosmopolitan restaurants that have opened up here in recent years. Italian, Indian, Chinese, Greek, making Horwich the current eating out capital of the Bolton Borough area. From its early 19th century origins clustered around Church Street, Lee Lane and Winter Hay Lane, Horwich has spread itself in several directions to accommodate its current population of 18,000 people. In recent years, its growth has been northwards from the town centre, off Brownlow Road, named after a prominent landowner and businessman, towards Rivington. Remarkably, the views of Rivington Pike from the town centre are as dramatic and inspiring now as they were all those years ago. The Crown Hotel signals the edge of the town centre and is almost the northwestern edge of the town. The hotel itself, a former stagecoach inn, was rebuilt about 1900 as a major new hostelry catering for the new railway age in Horwich, along with others like the Bridge Hotel, the Black Dog, Greenwood and Beehive. It was also the terminus of the Horwich tram, which ran along Chorleynew Road to Bolton, with its distinctive letter N until 1948. The tram shed is now an ATS tyre depot. Before returning along Chorleynew Road, it is vital to venture a little further westwards to recognise two major features for which the area is famous. Firstly, the remarkable feat of engineering that led to the creation of the Rivington Reservoir Complex, which stretches over 10 miles and comprises the Roddlesworth, Anglezark, Yarrow, Upper and Lower Rivington reservoirs. These were constructed between 1850 and 1875 to supply the city of Liverpool with water, and were designed by Thomas Hawksley, whose legacy has been enjoyed by millions of ramblers and fishermen ever since. The second major feature is Lever Park, entered via the gates erected in the memory of William Hesketh Lever, Lord Leverhulme, the salt magnate who bequeathed this park to the people of Horwich and Bolton, and built his remarkable bungalow and replica Japanese gardens on his favourite Rivington moor high above Horwich. Sadly, this is all that remains of the magnificent bungalow that once occupied this site. Although the gardens are dilapidated, they still provide a wonderful recreational resource for visitors from miles around. Let us hope that someday they will be restored to their former glory. David Smith, who has written a number of books about the history of this area, joins us outside Rivington Hall to tell us a little more about Lord Leverhulme.
William Hesketh Lever was a native of Bolton, born in Bank Street. His father was a wholesale grocer that sold bars of soap and amongst his other commodities. He took his son into the business with him. The net result was the setting up of a business empire based at Port Sunlight in Cheshire. He chose, after having bought the estate in 1900, not to live here in this hall, but to build his own sectional wooden building on the 1,000-foot contour of the moors behind. In 1902, he donated all this area, the Lever Park, to the people of Bolton and district forever. The main topic of interest is the bungalow built on the 1,000-foot contour just below Rivington Pike. That wasn't it though. He extended the property, he built gardens around it of lavish proportions, designed by one of the foremost landscape gardeners of the time, Thomas Hayton Mawson of Lancaster. In 1913, the sectional wooden building was burned down by a suffragette, Edith Rigby from Preston, and he quickly replaced it with a more modern building built of Lancashire stone from the local area, and that existed in his possession until 1925. On his death, the estate was sold to the McGee Marshall family, a brewers of Bolton. The site of the old bungalow is a fascinating area. Unfortunately, it was demolished in 1948 by the water authorities just after the war, when no suitable use could be found for it.
It is impossible in a short video portrait like this to do full justice to the Leverhulme legacy or to delve into the long and colourful history of Rivington. But the people of this area are greatly indebted to his vision and generosity. Although an international businessman, a distinguished art collector and politician, Lord Leverhulme never forgot his roots. This was a truly remarkable man whose like we shall not see again. We should treasure his legacy. However, the strongest local connection at this time is the Rivington and Blackrock High School, located in the heart of Lever Park, and which was founded as Rivington Grammar School in 1566 by Bishop James Pilkington of Rivington Hall. The later and much enlarged school is attended by girls and boys of secondary school age drawn from a wide area of the borough of Bolton. We must now return along Chorley New Road to witness the full impact of the greatest event in the history of Horwich, the building of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Works. We have already noted how rapidly the town centre grew as a result of the arrival of the works. However, the biggest physical impact was felt in Lower Horwich in the vicinity of Chorley New Road. The whole frontage that we see today, stretching about 2 miles from the Crown to the Beehive, was developed in the late 19th to early 20th century to serve the new community. Churches, schools of St Catherine's and St Mary's, shops, businesses, terraced houses, pubs. Sadly, the traditional industries like the brickworks, earthenware, sanitary ware, textiles and paper have gone, but many of the premises remain in other more modern day uses, and the air's a lot cleaner. At its height, the local works employed over 5,000 people and was the economic backbone of the town. Its valuable contribution to World War II was recognised by a royal visit in 1940. During its 97 years history, 1,830 steam locomotives were built and 50,000 repairs were carried out. The first loco to be built was number 1008, which now enjoys pride of place at York Railway Museum. Number 48756 was the last steam locomotive to be built at Horwich and left the works on the 6th of May 1964. Civic dignitaries, senior British Rail officials and the entire workforce turned out to give the loco a fitting send-off. During the intervening years, a locomotive which affectionately became known as the Horwich Crab was designed by the LMS's chief mechanical engineer George Hughes, who retired before the first loco was built. It fell to his successor Henry Fowler to add the finishing touches to a highly efficient and popular mixed traffic loco. In all, 245 were built. Its closure in 1983 was a devastating blow and the end of a century of proud tradition as one of the country's 6 famous railway towns, as we hear from 2 former railwaymen.
Well, this is a little bit of nostalgia for me, back on Horwich Works after very many years. I didn't spend all my working life here, only the early years, but it was a very happy place to work. I was an engineering apprentice, as they referred to them in my days, and I reckon I had a pretty good training. It was noted for giving a good training, and I went through most of the larger departments of Horwich Works, the boiler shop, the mechanised foundry, the iron foundry, in addition of course to the erecting shop, machine shop, tool room, all these places. It was pretty good to be around in those days. But after a few years I was taken on as a teacher at the local college, what was then the mechanics, and we had very close links, of course, with the works.
In the background you can see the boiler shop which is being demolished, and that is where I started my career. I was the office boy in the boiler shop for approximately 12 months. After my period there, I went into the tin shop, which is just behind us here. After a period in there, I went up to the smithy. There I was hammer driving in the smithy. From there I went into the machine shop. I had another period in the machine shop in another office where we used to provide the sketches for the lathes to make bushes, rivets, bolts, etc. that had been ordered. After that I went into the fitting section in the machine shop where cylinders were being made. I will go on about the camaraderie of the people in there. They were always, the fitters who you were training with were always very helpful, and there was no trouble at all teaching you what you had to know. I came across quite a number of characters, and the place was full of characters.
It was, certainly was.
To mention one, who was a well-known figure in Horwich, was Teddy Camel, who sold newspapers in Horwich. Liverpool Teddy they called him, and every night after he'd finished at work, he used to go out at the gates, meet his newspaper supplier, gather his lads and go out round the streets of Horwich selling newspapers. I could tell you other stories about him, but this would take too long. War broke out and I was sent on to Matilda tanks. I was only the second apprentice to go working on tanks, and this was early in 1939, before the war broke out. Eventually I was appointed to a staff job on the frame section. But my boss decided that he wanted me on the locos that came into the works in steam, to examine them while they were in steam to determine what faults there were on them and so forth. I applied for a position of a senior repairs inspector and was appointed. I had 18 wagon inspectors under me, and this is a job that I were on when I eventually finished in 1981, sorry. That's some of my career all through the years. I started in 1933, as I say, in the boiler shop office, and I finished up as a senior repairs inspector in 1981. The works closed in 1983, and I will say this, when it did close, I had 3 sons, a daughter, a son-in-law and a brother-in-law working on the works, and they all finished at that time.
Since the sun finally set on this historic industrial landscape, a number of landmark buildings associated with the works have been lost. Most notably the Mechanics Institute, which was known as the University of Railway Engineering and a major social centre for many RMI clubs and societies. The railway cafe has also gone, but much of the railway heritage lives on. The works itself is still there, now known as the Locomotion Industrial Estate, and occupied by a number of small businesses. The terraces of workers' houses nearby, named after famous railway engineers and their inventors. However, as we speak, the sun is rising over a new landscape, and Horwich is undergoing its third and possibly most dramatic commercial transformation in the past 200 years. Remarkably, at the end of each of the past 3 centuries, Horwich has reinvented itself. First, it was the bleaching revolution, led by the Ridgway family at the end of the 18th century. Then it was the railway revolution, led by the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Company. Now it is the retail and leisure revolution, led by Orbit Developments and Bolton Wanderers at the end of the 20th century. At Middlebrook, adjacent to Junction 6 on the M61 motorway, a multi-million-pound out-of-town shopping centre and leisure complex is already well established, with shops, restaurants, hotel, cinema, bowling alley, business units, tennis centre and the Wanderers Reebok Stadium as its centrepiece, the biggest landmark Horwich has ever had. All this development signifies a new era of rapid communication and travel, computer technology, the information highway, increased consumer spending and, most importantly for Horwich, new jobs in a post-industrial society. Incredibly, the small town of Horwich is once more at the forefront of commercial activity. Developing road and rail links over the years along the Middlebrook Valley corridor have enabled Horwich to maintain its locational advantages. The Lostock area has for many years been the home of British Aerospace, formerly de Havilland's. Beehive, as the name suggests, was a hive of activity in the textile age. Watson Steel have achieved worldwide fame for their engineering construction. Georgia Pacific and Ingersoll Rand too are large international companies, and the name of greenhouses is synonymous with quality baking. This part of Horwich now leads the economy of the town forward into the 21st century. There is a certain irony, since the recent evidence from the Red Moss area has found that this was one of the earliest parts of Horwich to be settled, with the discovery of a 3,000-year-old skull in 1946. To complete our circular tour of Horwich, we must now return northwards from Chorley New Road to Chorley Old Road, up Chapel Lane, past the oldest church in the area, established as a meeting house for dissenters from the old chapel in Horwich in 1690, and linked to some of the famous old families of the area, the Pilkingtons, the Whittles and the Greenhalghs. At Bottomouth Moor we find an old stone hamlet with weavers' cottages, very much linked to life on the moorland above, with one of Horwich's best known hostelries, the Blundell Arms, close by. An ancient coaching inn, the Moorgate Inn as it was previously known, came into prominence in November 1838, when an inquest was held there into the gruesome murder of George Henderson, who was shot while making his way over the moor to Blackburn. The defendant, James Whittle, stood trial but was acquitted. A pillar known as the Scotchman's Stump now marks the spot where Henderson was killed, near the Winter Hill television mast. Namesake Stuart Whittle takes up the story.
The moors behind me might look quite benign today, but on a cold November day when the mist comes down, they can be quite intimidating. Such was the scene 164 years ago when a 20-year-old Scotsman, George Henderson, a travelling packman, was killed around midday on November 9th, 1838. My namesake, James Whittle, was the chief suspect, having been seen in the vicinity with a loaded shotgun shortly beforehand. He was tried at Liverpool 5 months later, but acquitted on the basis of lack of evidence and the unreliable testimony of Joseph Halliwell, the chief witness. In making our assessment of this case today, we have to bear in mind that the moors in those days were a much different place. They were a hive of activity. People lived here, miners worked the adits and bell pits, there were travelling salesmen moving goods and services across these moors by horse and cart from Bolton to Blackburn. The landowners had regular shooting parties, and on top of that you had the nefarious activities of people like James Whittle. In the fog that day, it is quite possible that a terrible accident rather than a murder took place. In other words, someone could have mistaken George Henderson for a grouse breaking cover. Using today's modern forensic techniques, I'm sure this murder could be solved. But of course those techniques weren't available in the 1830s, and therefore the mystery of who killed George Henderson lives on. As for the chief suspect, James Whittle, he was a crack shot, but after the trial he never used a gun again. He became a recluse, went blind, and died a broken man in middle age. A tragic twist to an already tragic tale.
Following George's Lane up towards Rivington, we passed the site of some of Horwich's earliest farms and industries. Extensive quarrying produced the stone for the bleachworks and many of Horwich's old buildings, and it still continues today at Sandtime Quarries. The moor also yielded coal, which was originally mined by adits and bell pits all over the Winter Hill area, but most extensively at Montcliff Mine. The combination of coal and clay led to the establishment of Crankshaw's pipe works on Wilderswood Moor, where the raw material was transported down the hillside on a miniature railway to the kilns, at the Klondike as it was known. Farming has existed on the hillsides for centuries. Manor House and foxholes date back to Elizabethan times. Spinning on a domestic scale gradually gave way to textile manufacture at small mills like Crowther Fold, utilising the damp climate and plentiful water supply for bleaching and power, leading to the claim that Horwich was the birthplace of the Lancashire textile industry. These small mills were replaced by larger mills in the 19th century at Wilderswood and Foxholes, the former having links with Samuel Crompton, the Bolton inventor of the spinning mule. Neither of these mills still exist. Current planning permission protects the hillsides from further development, and that is to be commended. But we are indebted to our ancestors for the special moorland landmarks which still exist today. Unfortunately, Rockhaven Castle was demolished in 1942 and Leverhulme's bungalow was lost soon after World War II, as we've heard. But his pigeon tower and his gardens still remain, and most important of all to all Horwichers, the Tower of Rivington Pike, built by John Andrew Squire of Rivington as a hunting lodge in 1733, has survived the centuries to stand over a thriving community with a rich heritage and a positive future. And now, in the summer of 2002, the world will suddenly be beating a path to Horwich's door with the staging of the badminton and cycling events for the Commonwealth Games at the Middlebrook Arena and in the beautiful lanes of Rivington. Overnight, one of Lancashire's best kept secrets, namely the history and scenic delights of the Horwich-Rivington area, will be revealed to everyone. We hope you all enjoy what it has to offer and will return to sample its many qualities on future occasions. If you want to know more about the history of Horwich, why not visit the Heritage Centre within the Resource Centre at Longworth Road, which at the time of the Queen's Golden Jubilee is showing an exhibition of Horwich as it was 50 years ago. For further information on Horwich, why not visit our website www.horwichheritage.co.uk.